I can't even feign surprise at this point. This is a franchise that's been coasting off of the good faith the audience has had for the single good movie in said franchise for the past 32 years. And each installation only seems to drive the point home further and further that maybe it's best to quit while you're ahead. I can't even describe how much better the Park Builder video game tie-in is going to be than the movie itself. Which, if you grew up with a lot of movie tie-in video games like I did, will sound especially damning. I'd give you a proper spoiler warning, but quite frankly, if you've seen the trailers for the movie, you've seen the movie. But hey, just so you know, this will contain spoilers for Jurassic World Rebirth throughout. If you want my final rating for the movie, then it's probably like a 4 out of 10, so there you go, take that as you will. Some preemptive things to get out of the way. No, this is by no means the worst of the Jurassic movies, and I would say it easily beats out Fallen Kingdom and especially Dominion. Not a hard-won fight, being a better movie than Dominion is like being better at boxing than a third grader in a coma. Another thing is that most of the major prehistoric species basically had their entire scenes given away by the trailers. Everyone was already clowning on the trailers for giving away pretty much the entire river raft sequence piece by piece, but as it turns out, that's also most of the other big action set pieces. The Spinosaurus that everyone was so happy to see come back gets one additional moment not seen in the trailers. I hesitate to call it a scene, even though it involves the death of what can arguably be called a character because it's so damn short. Almost every other species in the movie is basically a Glupshidosaurus that gets screen time, which makes even the Lost World Mamenchisaurus look like it's a major character. Some species get more screen time in a tie-in Jeep commercial than they do in this movie. It's easiest to count the timecode that Ankylosaurus gets in frames, and this is apparently a species noteworthy enough to be sold to you on your Dr. Pepper cans. It seems that once each species has had its dedicated scene, that animal then ceases to exist, which is made especially evident by the conclusion of the Quetzalcoatlus scene, where it just stops giving a shit about all the people in its territory once they're all out of the immediate vicinity of the nest. And the ending of the movie where they escape the island on a boat, despite the fact that the only reason they're marooned in the first place is because of the cavalcade of swimming monstrosities just outside their doorstep. That's no longer a concern to them as they leave the island despite how massive the territorial range is of both the Mosasaurus and the Spinosaurus pack. The Quetzalcoatlus is the biggest species that I would say doesn't get its entire screen time spoiled by the trailers. It even manages to get a pretty gruesome kill, but it's on a character who's very obviously meant to be part of a balanced paleo diet because he has basically no lines and no characterization. This is another big mark against the movie as far as I'm concerned. If there's a character that you expect to die, they're going to die. If there's a character you expect to live, the universe will bend itself backwards so they manage to survive. The plot armor isn't the worst I've ever seen. That distinguished honor goes to Life is Strange 3.
Oh, she's dead! Oh, she's fucking dead! Oh, fuck you, I lived that. Oh, good, she's falling more! Am I at the bottom of this fucking mineshaft already? I should absolutely be dead. Yeah, her glasses are still on and not even broken, by the way. I get that you've been through several near-death experiences. You should be lucky to even, like, move your head. Bitch is dead. Oh, and off-screen, I just got out of the mine. I'm fine. Don't worry about me. And I guess off-screen, I'll just hike back to town. How long did he say? It was like 5 miles back to town? It's fine. It's fine.
But there's plenty of instances where a character should have easily been killed. That Quetzalcoatlus scene is one such example. It ends with one of the main characters, the paleontologist Henry Loomis, dangling over the edge of a sheer cliff and falling to his doom. Except that a few trees and a puddle of water break his fall despite the fact that he fell from a height of maybe 150, 200 feet. There's another character, by the way, the father of a vacationing family, who injures his leg pretty close to the beginning of the movie just by hitting it wrong while trying to rescue his daughter. This death-defying fall doesn't even injure Henry in the slightest. Another example is during the final confrontation with the hideous abomination that I've designated the Gigasloposaurus because I refuse to call it anything else out of sheer spite for its very existence. Duncan, who I would argue is one of the better characters in the movie, is cornered in a swamp by the Gigasloposaurus as he's led it away from everyone else with a flare so they can escape. The camera cuts away from him, and a couple minutes later, he's fine with no explanation despite how heavy the film is on explanation. And there's not even so much as a send-off for the Gigasloposaurus. I am convinced that once the camera cut away from it, like every other species in the movie, it simply stopped existing. It's good to know that they're making movies for babies that don't have a sense of object permanence yet. You may be wondering, if all the action set pieces are basically given away by the trailers, where does that leave the rest of this movie's 2-hour runtime? Well, it's mostly dedicated to scenes of characters walking around and expositing to each other either character backgrounds that go absolutely nowhere, or more frequently, why the events of the movie are taking place as they are, instead of in a more logical way, as will be the questions on everyone's minds, especially in the case of the existence of the Gigosloposaurus and the dragons, as any sane person would simply have these animals euthanized for being hideous monstrosities, and to make the quality of the film much stronger by eliminating their existence. Sometimes the same thing is exposited multiple times, and in one particularly bad instance at the beginning of the film, twice in the same scene, when obviously evil Big Pharma guy explains twice that they need DNA samples from living dinosaurs for their mission. And then Henry reacts to it the second time all shocked and confused like he didn't just hear it a second ago. For as long as the movie takes to get going to the island, the character work here is incredibly weak and not a lot of time is spent fleshing these characters out. It's hard to imagine that the same scriptwriter who managed to set up the terror of the velociraptors in a scene that established Alan's personality, forward-thinking paleontological views, and disdain for children all in one scene, was unable to do anything similar for these characters. But maybe everything I was just praising was due to Michael Crichton's involvement in writing the original script. I know David Koepp didn't have a lot of time to write this script, but it seems that he's lost a bit of his creative touch due to an interview stating that he had no ideas whatsoever in how to make a movie about dinosaurs in our world. So he made sure no one else ever would again. Great stuff, Dave. A good portion of the dialogue in this movie is dedicated to throwaway lines to explain the plot, or lines of dialogue that serve to constantly reinforce one of the worst decisions that have ever been made in this franchise. Actually, two of the worst decisions. Before this film even had anything to go on outside of this one screenshot of Scarlett Johansson and Jonathan Bailey crouching in some tall grass, we had a plot synopsis detailing that dinosaurs had largely gone extinct in the world again, outside of small pockets around the equator. And this blew my fucking mind when I first heard this, because the entire previous trilogy of movies was spent building up to the idea of dinosaurs being fully integrated into the modern day world. That's kind of what the world in Jurassic World means. Apparently Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom was an unexpected bastion of subtlety for this line, because it clearly went right over everyone else's heads.
Welcome to Jurassic World.
It's even harder to swallow every single scene featuring a dinosaur in Jurassic World Dominion than it already was, knowing that these dinosaurs are apparently doomed to a slow and agonizing death from lack of oxygen and disease, and apparently they can only survive in the tropics. Oh yeah, I can totally believe that with these animals in particular. At the beginning of the film, we see that an Apatosaurus has broken out of a local zoo and is basically dying in the streets tangled up in electrical cables. A stark contrast to the Apatosaurus we saw walking around in the snow during the opening of Dominion. It's like the filmmakers thought that dinosaurs being in our world was the problem everyone had with Dominion, and not the fact that it was a horribly written dumpster fire that had nothing to do with dinosaurs, and especially nothing to do with the concept of dinosaurs in our world, despite the film bookending itself on that note. So they're apologizing for the obviously terrible Dominion Apatosaurus scene by showing it lethargic and dying slowly and painfully in the streets while everyone just honks at it in their cars. And the beginning of the movie just beats you over the head with this idea that dinosaurs are basically gone from our world and no one cares about them at all anymore, to the point where even museums are closing down due to lack of public interest in dinosaurs. This is the same problem that Jurassic World had, but even worse. Because at least you could see that the theme park was still thriving in its day-to-day operations. So you could read Claire's comments about no one being interested in dinosaurs anymore as upper management wanting to make back minor losses with a new attraction, or just being flat out greedy. Of course, the reality with that situation is that the filmmakers simply wanted to have their cake and eat it too. They wanted a fully functioning Jurassic Park open to the public, but also needed to justify their creation of a monster, since no sane person would create such a monster unless they were pushed into making that choice. But in Rebirth, it's worse because there's no other way to read this. No one gives two shits about dinosaurs anymore, despite the fact that there was an entire organization dedicated to preserving dinosaurs in the last trilogy. You know, the DPG, the one that was run by Claire in Fallen Kingdom? What's she doing in this situation? Is she working to relocate dinosaurs to habitats they can survive in? Also, speaking of Claire, isn't it curious that during the events of Fallen Kingdom, this InGen owned site that was operating up until 2010 full of dinosaurs goes completely unmentioned, and we're left pretending that the ones on Nublar are the only dinosaurs left in existence? It's not like Claire wasn't privy to confidential information. She was at least partially responsible for signing off on the creation of the Indominus Rex, and this is obviously the facility that kickstarted hybrid research. Actually, these are mutants. They're not hybrids. Yes, they are. It's almost like this island has no place in canon and was just poofed into existence out of thin air for the sake of this movie. How curious. The fact that the public doesn't care about dinosaurs at all is a strangely cynical take from the point of view of, like, a person. People tend to like animals. If a city zoo elephant escaped and started dying in the middle of the street, I don't think everyone would be quite so callous about it, even in New York. But it's also strange from a franchise whose box office results are predicated on the fact that even when you can't see them in the flesh, people are fucking crazy about dinosaurs. But I have to wonder if the filmmakers attribute that less to the timeless enduring popularity of dinosaurs and more to brand loyalty. If the latter is the case, then I can understand why it's so cynical. I understand wanting to forget that the previous trilogy even happened, but the foundation of your story is predicated on their existence, and quite frankly, it's at its most interesting when you ignore the setup you're going for. I would argue that the scenes with the Mosasaurus and the Spinosaurus are the best in the movie because they fully take advantage of the idea of free-roaming prehistoric species and utilizing the unique traits of those species to craft scenes that wouldn't be possible otherwise and make sense within the narrative. It does make sense to discuss that narrative, but if you've been following the marketing material since this movie was announced, then you've basically gotten the whole picture. There is no surprises in this film whatsoever, and I almost wish I had the hindsight of not having known anything about it going in, so I could at least be a little bit surprised. But I know that some of that surprise would have instantly turned to ash in my mouth. A lot of people have described the plot of this movie as basic, almost in a good way. Like, hey, it's so basic that it's hard to fuck up. But I would describe it more as bare bones. There's not exactly a whole lot to chew on here. The film begins with a cold open flashback 17 years in the past, but the events of the film proper take place 2 years in our future. So if there's some kind of 9/11 level catastrophe in the next 2 years, then these guys are the assholes for not warning us. Anyway, the point is, it's 2010, we're in an InGen research lab on the stupid-ass unmentioned island of freaky mutants that are definitely not hybrids in any way. Yes, they are. Okay, so these scientists are apparently going inside of the enclosure for the Gigasloposaurus, or something. For some reason, it's extremely unclear what the hell's going on, when Bobson Dugnut here, and I'm not fucking kidding when I say this, eats a Snickers bar and drops the wrapper on the ground like a child, which no one notices or says anything about, when, like, dude, how many people can just litter at their job in front of all their coworkers and get away with that? What kind of fucking slapdash operation are you running here? I wouldn't expect this kind of thing from Jurassic World, and that place was a lawsuit nightmare waiting to happen. Anyway, the Snickers wrapper gets sucked into a little ventilation shaft on the inside of the door, and basically short-circuits the entire containment system, which allows the Gigasloposaurus to, well, kill Bobson Dugnut, but it's still stuck in there once the door closes. Everyone freaks out and panics, and apparently the entire island is evacuated forever, leaving it all behind, but there's no big escape scene, despite the fact that the Gigasloposaurus is free at the end of the movie. Like, the door is just open at the end, but the Gigasloposaurus is still inside of its enclosure, so I guess he's just really attached to that particular piece of territory, even though, as we see later, he can come and go as he pleases. Also, he's way too big to fit through the door, so I have no idea how he got out. With all the hazmat stuff these guys are wearing, I would be under the indication that once the airlock was closed, they could just, like, flood the enclosure with nerve gas to kill this thing if it seems like it's about to escape. Also, does it have access to open air in its enclosure? Like the outdoors? Is it not totally contained indoors? Because with this thing's big-ass gorilla arms, I'm surprised it's not just scaling the walls out of its enclosure to leave whenever it wants. I think this may honestly beat out Dominion as the worst cold open in the franchise, because of just everything. Dominion may as well not have had a cold open. This one is just straight up bad. I've actually heard some people describe this as the best scene in the movie, but I was ready to call it quits as soon as it ended because of how stupid everything was. First of all, is this even an environment you should be allowed to eat in? Like inside of a genetics lab as you're about to go inside the Gigasloposaurus' enclosure? Or something? Maybe? Like, they all have hazmat suits on, so I assume this is super high contamination risk, even though I'm not sure what the risk is? Is it just because Gareth Edwards likes having doomed people trapped behind a big glass door with smoke and red lighting? Another thing is that we have yet another example of the Jurassic Park sequels completely failing to make a convincing dinosaur escape sequence. The original is the only one that got this right. Nedry needed to turn off the fences on the island in order to make his escape, and if any dinosaurs happened to break out or anyone happened to get hurt or killed, that was just collateral. Until he became collateral unintentionally due to his own actions. Lots of cause and effect there, it's great stuff. But then in The Lost World, everyone inexplicably dies on the ship because there was a cutscene involving some raptors that never made it into the final movie, so the T-Rex just escapes into San Diego. Jurassic World has the Indominus use its 200,000 IQ to fool everyone into thinking it escaped, so we can convince the fat guard to open the main gate because he's too fat and stupid to run to the other side of the enclosure. And in Fallen Kingdom, the Indoraptor is fighting for last place, in which of the two creatures in the scene are the worst cartoon villain. Even Dominion has the Allosaurus and Carnotaurus being held in cages with restraints so flimsy they could just be shot to be opened. And now we have the beluga-headed dingus who can only manage to secure a kill because of a Snickers wrapper. Un-fucking real. The other thing is that I'm absolutely not convinced by the existence or practicality of this island to begin with. I think it was stupid when The Lost World introduced Isla Sorna. I think it's stupid now. Like, oh yeah, even though all the research and breeding was done on Isla Nublar in the first movie, and we got to see baby dinosaurs hatching from their eggs, now all of a sudden there was an entirely separate island we were doing work on the whole time that's also just crawling with dinosaurs because Universal wanted a sequel to their blockbuster, but Michael Crichton napalmed Isla Nublar at the end of the first book, so he really had to stretch things to fit. Now we're doing it again, except this one's in a completely separate ocean because that's practical for transporting live animals to your theme park, right? And also, even though we had Isla Nublar where we were explicitly creating hybrids with the Indominus and Scorpius, we also had the secret third island where we're creating mutants that are absolutely, unquestionably, not hybrids. Yes, they are. Which is my third point. Yes, they're hybrids, and I am fucking sick to death of genetically altered freaks, hybrids, mutants, whatever the hell you want to call them, instead of regular dinosaurs, and I know I'm not alone here. The existence of the Gigasloposaurus and the fucking dragons is once again another indication that I really think everyone involved in making this film learned the wrong lessons from Dominion. Dominion was the only movie in the Jurassic World trilogy to not feature any hybrids, but you'd be forgiven for thinking otherwise with this ugly-ass fucking Giganotosaurus design. And it was also the movie that performed the worst of the trilogy at the box office. But there's a lot of factors that go into that performance. For one, the movie was fucking terrible. It is a movie for absolutely no one but the most Stockholm Syndrome of Jurassic Park fans. It's too boring for action thriller fans, too unwilling to follow in the premise that the fans wanted to see, and that battle in Big Rock, and all of the ARG marketing material, and the tie-in cartoon series for the movie seem to tease, and it's too stupid for its plot to make any sense for general filmgoers. For another thing, this was immediately after COVID. Theaters were suffering big time and are really still in the process of recovering thanks in no small part to the rise of streaming services trying to replace them. And third, let's just look at the Jurassic World trilogy as a whole. The first movie was the revival of a much beloved franchise that kind of predated the whole everyone getting sick of nostalgia bait thing until like a year later with Ghostbusters, and it brought a sequel that was in production for 14 years out of development hell, on top of being, for all of its faults, a general crowd pleaser. It's the Force Awakens of the Jurassic Park franchise. It revived the series, but at a heavy cost, and looking back on the movie itself, it's really not very good. Then you have Fallen Kingdom, a movie that a lot of people probably saw because, hey, it's the sequel to Jurassic World, a movie they probably enjoyed. Or they just saw it because dinosaurs are cool. However, Fallen Kingdom suffered from a noticeable drop in quality in just about every facet imaginable, except for the visuals, with an absolutely nonsensical script, and utterly baffling characters with an annoying screamy guy, a dinosaur veterinarian who's never seen a dinosaur before, and an evil heir to a millionaire's fortune who wants to sell dinosaurs as soon as he can get them and not set them up on the island that said millionaire just gives to him so he can poach from the breeding populations whenever he wants, Also, he can sell those living dinosaurs for less millions than he would have gotten for doing nothing and just being this guy's heir, or by selling real-life dinosaur fossils, which these living dinosaurs are worth less than. So with all that taken into consideration, people would be much less likely to return for the sequel to that movie, especially when the word of mouth gets around upon Dominion's release that it doesn't even follow through on the premise that Fallen Kingdom left, which was a plot centered around dinosaurs in our world. So the franchise has a lot of reasons to see diminishing returns in terms of its box office, but it seems like no one's managed to correctly identify what the mistakes in Dominion even were.
I'm not making the same mistakes again.
Yes, you are, John. It took just 2 movies for everyone to get sick of hybrids and never want to see them again. But now we just have them again, but we think we can get away with it by just sidestepping the word hybrid at any given opportunity? Ooh, genetic crossbreeding experiments, mutated freaks. Fuck you. They're hybrids. This is literally just a raptor with pterosaur wings. It's a hybrid. My ultimate problem with this opening scene, and maybe my biggest problem with the whole movie, is something I'll talk about later once we get to the finale. But for now, we flash forward to the modern day, where evil Big Pharma guy is putting together a team to go to Land Before Time 5, the Mysterious Island. Is that the right one? It is the 5th one! Oh, I'm so right! Oh, I'm so based! On that team, Zora, Scarlett Johansson, is like this Spec Ops mercenary agent who's really only interested in the money, and Henry is a paleontologist whose museum is shutting down due to a lack of interest in dinosaurs. But he also has an interest in the medical breakthrough that evil Big Pharma guy is offering for more humanitarian reasons. Also, are dinosaurs the only thing in this museum? Because there's a lot more than just dinosaurs at my local museum. Not to mention the field museum, whatever, never mind. Said medical breakthrough is basically a universal heart disease treatment that can only be synthesized by using the DNA of the 3 largest prehistoric species from land, sea, and air. They say dinosaurs as a catch-all term, even the paleontologist does this, but I'm way too autistic about this to not make the distinction. The explanation given for why this medical breakthrough will even work is that the big animals have big strong hearts and had extremely long lifespans, so their juice has freaky-deaky properties in it. I can kind of buy that on its own, but I feel like the only way you would know about these properties for sure is if you had the DNA already on hand to definitively reproduce the results. As it stands, it kind of just sounds like this heart medication is speculative at best, and this would go towards heart disease research. But they act like the cure is guaranteed as soon as they get the DNA, so I'm not entirely convinced by this premise. What I'm even less convinced on is the fact that, like, these animals were cooked up in a lab, so just make more. They never give an explanation for why they can't just create more of these species. They explain why they need the DNA from living specimens, which again, I'm fine with, but just make more. The fiendish Dr. Wu is still alive as of the last movie, and he's responsible for creating all these animals in the first place. Just hire him to make a few animals. Money is clearly no object to you. Big Pharma seems to be recruiting people he can easily manipulate into wanting to go in the first place by dangling a bunch of money in front of Zora, and teasing Henry with the idea of seeing dinosaurs in their natural habitat for the first time. In case it wasn't extremely clear, he is going to act as our human villain, which should have been obvious from the moment he's revealed to be working for Big Pharma. So everyone goes to meet up with Zora's team, all of whom are completely lacking in any character traits and personality except for one guy who's just kind of an asshole, and also Duncan, who's kind of the leader of this bunch. Guess which ones live and die. They're at this port, which seems to be at least somewhat related to all the extinct animals, because these fishermen dump out a Dunkleosteus head, and Duncan has a set of megalodon jaws, and also this weird-ass fucking miniature pteranodon in a bird cage. I have no idea what the fuck that was all about. Anurognathus is in this movie, but for this scene they were just like, fucking nah dude, tiny pteranodon. It's literally there for a handful of frames, which I can say for the vast majority of species in this movie, including Anurognathus, so I don't want to get too hung up on it, but seriously, fucking Petri looking ass. There's this like bit they do where they basically haggle Big Pharma into giving them more money that I think goes on for way too long and isn't all that funny, which is basically what I could say for all of the comedy in this movie. Apparently one of the golden rules that David Koepp had when writing this script was that comedy is oxygen, and now having watched the movie, my fears on what that statement means have been realized, which is to say there's about as many Marvel quips as you would expect.
I'm taking her home with me.
That may or may not be a terrible idea.
Though thankfully this clunker from the trailer didn't make it in.
None of what you just said is good.
Peak example of said attempts at comedy can be found on the boat where a random vacationing family resides. The group consists of a dad, his 2 daughters, one a teenager, the other around 8 or 9 maybe, and the teenage daughter's boyfriend Xavier. And I have never wanted someone to get eaten by a dinosaur for being annoying as much as I have this guy. Move over, Amanda Kirby. The family is such a mixed bag of an addition to this movie in general. On the one hand, Xavier is obnoxious and brings down every scene he opens his mouth in. On the other hand, I actually thought the youngest daughter was kind of endearing in that after the 2 mosasaur attacks, she ends up being quite traumatized by the whole thing in a pretty realistic way, but she ends up finding comfort in the little Aqualops that the marketing loves so much. I thought the whole thing with the Aqualops would be annoying, like it'd be an overly cutesy mascot character or something, but I actually thought it was kinda cute how she basically treated the little dinosaur like a security blanket and coping mechanism, even if I think the dinosaur itself was way too anthropomorphized. However, with the whole dinosaurs are dying out thing, the fact that she brings the Aqualops home with her is probably not the heartwarming note the movie thinks it is.
Terrible idea.
I'd be willing to sidestep this issue if the movie wasn't so insistent on pounding it into my fucking skull for the entire first act how dinosaurs just aren't surviving outside of the equator. Maybe the family lives around the equator. I don't think they ever specify where they're from, only that they're sailing to South Africa. But they all predominantly speak English without any strong accent to speak of that I could detect, so I don't know, they could be from Florida for all I know. The teenage daughter says she's going to NYU, so I assume they're American citizens, but I guess there's every chance she's studying abroad? Ultimately though, I feel like the family was a mostly superfluous addition to the movie. There's one extremely minor character arc to speak of in that the dad sort of warms up to Xavier after he helps save teenage daughter, but that's really it. Duncan is oddly more protective of the youngest daughter than her own dad is, but that's because of his own personal baggage that we'll get to in a second. And the biggest thing the family brings to the plot is that teenage daughter knows that Big Pharma is evil because he left her to fall overboard during the mosasaur attack because she was about to call for rescue and give the whole operation away. I don't know, if I were Big Pharma, I would have just pulled her up and taken a second to explain that this is a clandestine operation that would get everyone on this boat thrown in prison if the authorities knew about it. It's weird that after characterizing him as someone who's good at manipulating people, he refuses to even try to manage that with this girl. I'd be convinced to keep my mouth shut if I thought that me, my dad, and my boyfriend were going to the slammer just for being here, with who knows what happening to my little sister. Other than that, once everyone gets to the island, they're basically just kind of doing their own thing as the movie's B-plot. But you know none of them are gonna die, and they're kind of just going from place to place without much character work, so I ended up losing interest in them. Their most notable scene is the river raft sequence with the T-Rex being adapted from the novel. And as a novel fan, it is cool to see it in action, and the T-Rex looks and acts great, but it's ultimately nothing more than an action set piece that doesn't change anything about the characters or their interactions. Not that there was much there to begin with. Again, there's almost something with Dad and Xavier, but this is weirdly cut short mid-interaction by Xavier pissing all over the Velociraptor's legacy in this franchise, but perhaps I'm getting ahead of myself. For now, just know that their boat gets attacked by the Mosasaurus and everyone makes it out alive, though their boat is totaled and they need to call for help before it sinks. Back with the Mercs, it seems like this was the single allotted scene for what we can generously call character time, which is to say that people feel that now is the time to talk about their sad backstories in a way that will only inform the actions of one of these characters. Characters who are going to live, I should specify. The fodder characters barely get so much as a line, to the point where I only knew this girl's name by the time she had already been eaten by a Spinosaurus on the beach. See, at one point Zora is talking to Duncan, and she's like, "Hey, did you work things out with your wife?" And he's like, "Nah, because anytime we looked at each other, all we saw was our little boy." Alright, so Duncan had a son who died, and it's pretty clear he blames himself for it in some way, even if we never get any details on that. That's fine, decent groundwork for a character. This also explains why he's so protective of the family, and why he's willing to sacrifice himself for them in the film's climax. Sort of. Zora has 2 elements to her sad backstory. One is that her mother died recently, and she didn't even get the chance to attend her funeral. A jokey quip is made about this, which kind of undercuts it, and a close friend of hers was killed in her most recent mission involving a car bomb, and apparently it was pretty gruesome. You'd expect this to be some kind of setup for a payoff, or inform her character and her choices. Even the bad Jurassic Park movies got this right, but honestly, not really. The best you can come up with is that it's implied by Big Pharma that Zora's mother died of heart failure, and that's why she's invested in getting this treatment. but she seems pretty dismissive of that initial manipulation attempt, and it seemed more like the dangling dollar signs mattered more to her than that, and there's no mention of her mother when she ultimately decides to sacrifice the money she would have made from the operation by selling the treatment's patent to Big Pharma's company. I could be just as easily convinced that she came to the conclusion to not go for a patent on the treatment because of her friendship with Henry without this backstory element needing to exist. Or that he was just very convincing because she admits to not having thought about this as an alternative until he brings it up. Besides, I'm not even sure how practical it is to sell the samples to Big Pharma's company if Big Pharma himself is now dead. I assume he would be pretty important in that transaction. I also have no idea if anyone else even knows about this research or these samples or anything. Again, they're treating the samples themselves like a surefire cure instead of just an element to medicinal research. And her dead friend is never brought up again for the rest of the movie, and there's no thematic through line with anything else that happens. It feels like sad backstory for the sake of sad backstory. It's not like this informs her character in a way that she's determined to keep everyone alive, but kicks herself and feels guilt for everyone she lets die. There's nothing like that. Duncan is the only character whose actions and character traits are informed by his backstory. The rest of the characters besides Zora don't really have a background at all because most of them aren't actually characters. This even extends to the family who are alive all throughout the entire movie. As endeared as I was to the little girl's trauma, it does result in her being very quiet for most of her screen time that isn't spent running away from dinosaurs. Teenage girl is barely a presence at all outside of her just having the information that Big Pharma is evil. Most of her lines are dedicated to just saying that Xavier isn't all that bad to her dad, despite the fact that even though he's her boyfriend, she's never romantic once with him throughout the movie and can never actually say anything definitive about him. So it feels like her character's existence is an excuse to bring Xavier along for the ride, and Xavier's purpose in the movie is what can generously be called comic relief, and he barely gets a line after the piss scene. Dad never has much of anything besides his sort of reconciliation with Xavier, which again, goes nowhere. He barely interacts with his two daughters unless it involves getting them from point A to point B. He's a surprisingly passive force throughout the movie, which I think is helped by the fact that the family B-plot mostly involves them just kind of meandering towards their destination without much else going on. There's nothing like there is in the original movie where Grant is clearly getting to the point of liking the kids, having fun with them, and risking his life to save them, despite his aversion to kids earlier in the movie. Or there almost is, but the movie literally pisses it away for a joke. The fact that this is already a big family unit doesn't help this either, because it doesn't leave much room for character interactions or conflict. Like, things are set up earlier in the movie that go nowhere. The oldest daughter is going off to college, which it seems like the dad isn't ready for, but this is mentioned once and then never again. At the river raft scene, teenage daughter is the one who has to go and get the raft because of her dad's injured leg. And I think this would have been the perfect opportunity for a callback to this, where the dad doesn't want her to go by herself, but she has to prove herself to him that she's ready to do it. It's clear what both of them are really talking about. Something like that. But the youngest daughter's trauma is brushed over by basically everyone in the family, and hell, even Dad's leg injury only matters when the plot wants it to matter, considering he spends most of the movie walking around for miles on uneven terrain. Ultimately, I wasn't really impressed with the character roster, and I honestly think that even Jurassic World had more defined characters in spite of that movie's many flaws. You have two very similar protagonists with former military, MCU alum, quippy, hyper-competent main characters, and I still feel like Owen has more personality than Zora does. I know that her character is just here to do a job, but I kinda hate to say that it feels like Scarlett Johansson is too. Henry gets some decent moments where his love of prehistory shows, and the actor does a good job of portraying that, but it's a bit hard to stomach when the movie is going to drop all the dinosaurs in the third act for fucking monsters. So the mercenaries are on the tail of the Mosasaurus, and the dialogue here confused the hell out of me. Big Pharma says that InGen put a tracker on the Mosasaurus when it was in captivity so it's easy to locate, or something to that effect. But then does that imply that this Mosasaurus is the same one from Jurassic World? The same one from the theme park? Because, it isn't. It very visibly, obviously isn't. Unless you mean to tell me that InGen cloned a completely different looking Mosasaurus on this island, where they also kept it in captivity, and when they all evacuated it, this one also just so happened to escape out into the sea. Boy, are these mosasaurs ever lucky that they refuse to not connect their fucking lagoons to the ocean. But wait a minute, if that were the case, then wouldn't that mean that this Mosasaurus has been swimming around freely in the open ocean since this island was abandoned in 2010? Good thing it just so happened to stick around this island despite the fact that the Jurassic World Mosasaurus was crossing the entire ocean swimming around the Bering Sea in its free time. To be clear, I'm confused because this seems like a blatant retcon of the Mosasaurus design at the very least, though I'm not too bothered by this as it's a massive improvement over the original Mosasaurus design, and also potentially a retcon of its behavior as it seems to be hanging around this one island within swimming distance of its Spinosaurus buddies. I don't know, maybe the Mosasaurus bought a timeshare here. The distress call from the family goes out, and of course the mercenaries are the only group close enough to actually respond to the call, and Duncan calls off the immediate hunt for the Mosasaur to rescue them despite the protests of Big Pharma. Solid, if basic characterization for Duncan here. He's willing to potentially miss out on this opportunity if it means saving lives. His values are clear as day, and in contrast with those of Big Pharma, who couldn't give two fucks if people live or die as long as he gets his paycheck. I wonder if the movie is trying to send a message here. I don't know if the message is quite as effective as bullets. Although a characterizing moment, this act does mess with the pacing a bit, as it seems like we're about to ramp up towards an action scene, but then we slow down to pick up the family and everyone introduces themselves, and then we speed back up once it's time to actually dart the Mosasaur for the DNA sample. And yeah, it's a fun sequence. The Mosasaurus looks fantastic, and I like the fact that it's this big chase where the people are the ones chasing the giant prehistoric reptiles, and the tone shifts from a tense chase to a daring escape as the animals turn the tables on them, and taking place on the water makes it feel especially distinct in the franchise. The Mosasaurus has always felt underutilized to me in the Jurassic World movies. It was just there to sometimes jump out of the water and not do anything of much consequence outside of the first movie's finale, and they really had no idea what to do with it once it got out to sea. The closest they ever got to doing anything with it was in Camp Cretaceous, and we all know what the result of that attack was. Fucking robot dogs! Even the Spinosaurus in Jurassic Park 3 was mostly just another big theropod. If you replace it with a T-Rex for the rest of the movie's runtime, the movie doesn't really change at all. So giving the Spinosaurus pack a deep-sea water scene on top of the beach ambush makes them feel that much more like a unique amphibious threat. A lot of the scene was given away in the trailers and the promotional material, including the death of asshole mercenary guy whose sole personality trait is that he really just wanted an excuse to kill a dinosaur with his stupid looking guns and neurotoxin darts, I guess. And so he gets eaten by a Spinosaurus for his troubles, all while traumatizing this poor girl even more than she already was. The shame is that he was the fodder who easily had the most personality, and he dies first in a way that's not especially satisfying for what a jackass he seemed like. As much as I think this is one of the better sequences in the movie, arguably the best, I still have my issues with it, and one of those issues is the plot armor. Teenage girl goes overboard when Big Pharma lets her fall in, and so Xavier jumps in after her, and then Dad and the little girl jump in after them. Keep in mind, they're trying to outrun a speeding Mosasaurus and a pack of swimming Spinosaurus, and Dad has an injured leg at this point while he's jumping out into the sea. And not only does everyone apparently manage to avoid the ravenous swimming reptiles, but they all manage to meet up and swim to shore just fine without any further incident. Meanwhile, back on the beach once the boat crashes, an actually expendable character is eaten by a Spinosaurus coming out of the water almost immediately. I am kind of surprised that this movie had the balls to kill off a woman after the last time this franchise did that, and received quite a bit of, in my opinion, undeserved criticism for doing that. Like, the actress thought it was cool. This movie has so many worse problems to hyperfixate on. This scene is really not that bad.
We're about to die in like a very cool way.
Also, a more minor point, the whole mutualistic relationship between the Spinosaurus and the Mosasaurus is woefully undercooked. It's unclear what kind of benefit each one brings to the other, especially when each Spinosaurus who gets a kill just kinda keeps it for themselves. The Mosasaur doesn't get anything. It seems like the Spinosaurs are more of a detriment to it getting a meal than anything else. Really, the Mosasaurus just seems to be fully territorial against boats, which is weird considering how Henry describes this as mutualistic hunting behavior. Anyway, everyone reaches the island itself, and the priority is just to get the other two samples and get the hell out. Zora apparently figured ahead of time that they'd probably need to be evacuated by helicopter and got someone to do just that. And Big Pharma is surprisingly chill with this considering he's under the impression that he just let a teenage girl and her entire family die to keep this clandestine operation under wraps, but I guess he just implicitly trusts Zora's pilot contact. The point is that this adds a ticking clock element because the helicopter isn't going to stick around for very long, only doing a quick flyby for 2 minutes by the helipad very late at night. Why late at night when everyone would be extremely difficult to spot? Well, because we can't have the final scene be spooky if it isn't at night. So basically, it's a race to get to the other samples and get to the helipad before time runs out. And if they happen to run into the family, then hey, good for them. It's something that Duncan brings up like once, maybe twice, but honestly, you'd be forgiven for thinking the mercenary group completely forgot about the family for the vast majority of the movie's runtime. And yeah, that is pretty much how the plot follows from there. The family is making their way towards the worker village by following geothermal pipes and eventually the river, which results in them running into the Aqualops and the T-Rex during the river raft sequence. And the Mercs go to get the Titanosaurus and Quetzalcoatl samples, and eventually the two meet back up at the worker village by the helipad for the climax. I've already gone into a lot of detail on what happens in the interim between these set pieces in terms of character interactions or motivations, so how are the set pieces themselves? Well, I've seen a lot of people praise the Titanosaurus sequence, but honestly it didn't really win me over. All I could see was the extremely obvious retread of the Jurassic Park Brachiosaurus scene that it was clearly trying to be. And this is something that the series has banked on time and time again, so pardon me for not being the most enthused about it. I'm desperately ready for a sauropod in this series to do anything besides exist majestically while swelling music plays, but perhaps I'm asking for a bit too much at this point. When it comes to the Quetzalcoatlus, it plays out pretty much how you'd expect it to from the trailers. They scale the cliff face and decide to get the sample from an egg instead of the adult, but the adult comes in to defend its nest anyway and wreaks havoc, killing the final fodder team member in the process. Something to note here is that when Henry is dangling off the cliff's edge, he's desperately putting the sample's safety above his own. This is obviously something that matters a lot to him, and he values it more than his own life. At least that's the read I got out of it. And yet, despite the fact that Zora can see all this go on, there's no real acknowledgement from either of them that this even happened. He's alive, we got the sample, we got a helicopter to catch, let's go, go, go. Now, there's some small breaks where the characters talk to one another throughout basically this entire escapade, and it comes down to a few things. Mainly exposition, and also talking about the samples and what to do with them. Like on the beach, Big Pharma, basically out of nowhere, seems to be pressured by Zora into talking about how the island was a research facility for all the freaks and weirdos that were too fucked up to go to Jurassic World. Like the adorable Aqualops, I guess. And a pretty normal looking T-Rex. Sure. This is curious because you'd think this would be after running into one of said freaks and weirdos, but all we've seen at this point are the Mosasaurus and the Spinosaurus. And sure, the Spinosaurus are weird, but that's just because that's how they are. I'm not sure if the movie is trying to imply that the swimming Spinos are mutants, which is why this is being brought up now. I say this because Big Pharma has no reason to bring this up unless the cat is out of the bag, so to speak, and we don't get to hear the beginning of the conversation that brings this point up. It's not like these guys didn't know there would be dinosaurs on this island, it's the whole reason they're here. It feels very chopped together, like we're missing a scene or two of context. Henry asked the big obvious question of why not just euthanize all the hybrid freaks, and the explanation that Big Pharma gives is incredibly flimsy. Apparently creating new species is expensive, so if you create something new and kill it off, then what do you tell your bank about that? Bitch, have you heard of a tax write-off? Movie studios do this all the time. Make an entire movie, don't bother releasing it, and just kill it off before it can so much as reach a screen and write it off on your taxes. That, but it's a dinosaur, or a fucking dragon, or a fucking rancor. The marketing seemed to try and play this place up as an island of misfit freaks of nature, but honestly, most of what we see outside of the Gigasloposaurus and the dragons, who basically only feature in the third act, is pretty bog standard for this series. I don't see what's keeping the Titanosaurs here on this island when they seem to be effectively identical outside of appearance to every other big sauropod we've seen. What's so special about the T-Rex, the Dilophosaurus, the Ankylosaurus, the Velociraptor, the Aqualops? Hell, the only things weird about the Quetzalcoatlus, Mosasaurus, and Spinosaurus is that their designs are different than what we've seen in previous movies to a more obvious extent. But dinosaur designs change in this series all the time. Look at the Parasaurolophus as an example. In fact, why is the Parasaurolophus carcass on this island the one from Dominion? Oh, whatever. If this was some hybrid research facility, what's with all the normal species? Is it because for as much as you clearly want to shove in random garbage monsters, this is still a dinosaur movie, and so you have to cram in dinosaurs even when it really doesn't fit with your narrative at all? Everything we see in this lab is some kind of abomination. There's two-headed Triceratops, two-headed dragons, and of course, the Gigasloposaurus. Nothing indicates that anything even remotely normal is going on here, and yet you'd be forgiven for thinking this is just Isla Nublar brought back from the dead for all the fucking difference it makes until the goddamn piss scene. Fuck it, I'm talking about the piss now. So the family are basically trying to get some rest in the middle of the night with Dad and Xavier on watch. Dad is like, hey, you saved my daughter, I'm really grateful. And Xavier's like, nah, bro, I suck and shit, man. No, you're really not such a bad guy after all. My daughter was right about you. Nah, man. Anyway, I'm gonna go take a piss. And Dad's just like, okay, never fucking mind, I guess. And as Xavier is going to drain the garden hose, a pair of velociraptors begin creeping up behind him. And there's a small glimmer of hope that maybe this annoying goober will finally die. But then out of nowhere, one of the raptors is fucking mauled to death by a dragon, which then proceeds to fly away with its dead body. The sound of this scuffle terrifies Xavier so much that he basically freezes midstream and then gets back to it once the raptor is dead and the dragon flies off with its carcass. This is the only appearance of the velociraptor in the film. I hate basically everything about this scene, including but not limited to the fact that I called it weeks in advance. The only thing I missed was the piss.
God knows that we can't do any damage control for the raptors that we did in the fucking Jurassic World trilogy. No, we'll just replace them. I swear to fucking God. I swear to fucking God. Like, you know that scene in Lonesome Road in Fallout New Vegas? Where, like, the Deathclaw is walking through the tunnel, and then one of the tunnelers just instantly fucking kills it? It's gonna do that. That's gonna happen with the Mutodon and the Raptor. Or, like, in the Predator, where, like, the super advanced Predator who's weaponized autism just, like, smashes the face of the original Predator and, like, beats the shit out of him. It's gonna be like that. That's gonna happen to the Raptors.
The opportunity for a genuine character arc and a bonding moment between these two is completely quashed for no reason except to introduce the dragons as a threat by doing the laziest fucking thing imaginable. You know when the Spinosaurus killed the T-Rex to establish that it was an even bigger threat and everyone fucking hated it? Let's do that, but with a make-believe fucking dragon. Actually, it's called a Mutodon and it's a muted cross dragon. Fuck you. Get out of my face. This shit is a dragon. Actually, it's a wyvern because... Dragon. As much as I hate the Gigaloposaurus, I think I actually ended up hating the dragons even more by the end of this movie. Because you know what? At least the Gigaloposaurus got to kill people. Yes, you heard me right. The Velociraptor was killed off by the obviously more threatening dragon, and they didn't even get to kill anyone because the movie ran out of fodder characters by that point. Do I even need to point to the previous movies as an example? The Raptors were easily the biggest threat in the original movie. They killed multiple characters, like actual named characters with personalities, and they were a menace for the entire third act of the movie after they were built up as being absolutely terrifying from the first time we see Alan Grant, a promise they absolutely delivered on. The Raptors don't even have much presence in the Lost World outside of one scene, but their kill count is enormous in that movie. And even Jurassic Park 3 makes them highly intelligent, threatening, and vengeful, while also giving us a particularly gruesome kill with Udesky. Even Jurassic World, a movie heavily criticized for defanging the Raptors, has them slaughtering mercenaries by the truckload, but the Jurassic World finale and sequels are where the Raptors were in dire need of redemption. The final battle of Jurassic World has the Raptors being incredibly anthropomorphized, and acting completely out of line with how they've been portrayed for the rest of the movie. These are the same animals that tried to kill Owen for turning his back to them, and have been shown to still be extremely dangerous throughout most of the film's runtime. Fallen Kingdom has Blue being the only raptor present, and she's incapacitated by a bullet wound for most of the movie, and then she's acting like a superhero for the rest of it. Dominion barely had any Velociraptor screen time because the movie isn't actually about dinosaurs, and most of that screen time is devoted to the cutesy baby character Beta, who is completely inconsequential to the plot and not threatening in the slightest. The only raptor action scenes we get are with the Atrociraptors and the Pyroraptor. And the Atrociraptors are complete goobers who fall all over themselves trying to kill our protagonist while not accomplishing anything outside of hopefully preventing the audience from falling asleep. And as happy as I was to see a feathered raptor in one of these movies, even if it did have a horrible fucked up monster face, the Pyroraptor scene was completely pointless. It could have been cut from the movie entirely, and the Pyroraptor does nothing of note, and gets absolutely humiliated by our characters. The Raptors needed redemption after the damage the World Trilogy did to them, and what did we get? A repeat of the Predator. Fuck that old thing you like and were scared of before. this new genetically engineered badass is even more terrifying. And then you undercut that by making it a pathetic, ugly, worthless sap who can't kill anyone and dies in a sewer to small arms fire. The Spaz 12 was standard issue at Jurassic Park, and the Velociraptors in the original movie had everyone on the backstep. Though maybe Alan would have had enough ammo to kill one if he didn't eject a shell here. But as we're talking about the finale of this movie and what can generously be called this well thought out and structured review, allow me to share with you what is probably my biggest problem with the movie. All of the worst screenwriting decisions were completely pointless. Killing off the mainland dinosaurs does not affect the plot in any way, shape, or form. It does not matter at all. If you cut this detail out of the movie, the only thing that changes is that you save a solid chunk of time pissing me off at the beginning, you give yourself time to craft characters with actual personalities, and you give yourself room for sequels that don't involve going to yet another tropical island full of fucking dinosaurs again. Inventing this new InGen owned island that was never mentioned before and creates glaring problems in the canon, once again, completely pointless. This should have been obvious by the way this was exposited when everything involving the hybrids was brought up out of nowhere. This movie could have taken place anywhere tropical and isolated from civilization and nothing would have changed. It doesn't even need to be on an island. But you might be thinking, well, if there's no InGen experiments going on here, how can there be any hybrids? Which is the final problem. There is absolutely no point in including hybrids in the movie. It adds absolutely nothing. Probably due in no small part to the fact that basically everything you can say in-universe and metatextually about the creation of hybrids was said in the first two Jurassic World movies. Like the movie or not, Jurassic World was a movie about the creation of a monstrous hybrid abomination. The movie's script just wouldn't have functioned the same if the Indominus were replaced by some other big theropod. You cannot say the same for the dragons or the Gigaloposaurus. This is not a movie about hybrids or mutants or genetic crossbreeds or whatever the fuck you want to call them. It just has them in there with no satisfying justification for their existence for the sheer sake of thinking it's cool when it's lame and played out. You could replace the dragons with a Utah Raptor or a Herrerasaurus or any medium-sized carnivore, and the only difference is they wouldn't be able to fly, which doesn't even matter in the first place since the only times they actually fly are to give Xavier plot armor by flying away from him, and by flying in to ambush everyone at the gas station, which doesn't matter because no one fucking dies. The only thing that changes about the plot once the dragons arrive is that Big Pharma no longer has a gun. Yeah, he just found a gun on a crashed pilot earlier in the movie, I'm not even gonna bother. But Zora does have the gun, which she just uses to shoot one of the dragons dead, and Big Pharma now has a car, which he drives straight into the waiting jaws of the Gigaloposaurus, so he dies. Speaking of the Gigaloposaurus, it just shows up, like right next to the gas station the family is hiding out in. Henry happens upon the research lab and hey, there's the Gigaloposaurus' enclosure, and you can see it kind of walking around outside a bit, and then it just gets involved in the finale like this is what it was all building up to. No? Who are you? What are you? Why do you even exist? How do you change size so that an entire helicopter fits in your mouth before shrinking down so that Big Pharma is roughly the same size as that helicopter? I knew that the mere mention of these freaks wasn't going to be narratively satisfying at all, but I was completely unprepared for the filmmakers to not even try in justifying their existence or presence in the finale or in the movie as a whole. And outside of Piss Central and the Snickers opener, this is the only time the hybrids feature in the movie. As soon as the finale begins, I just completely lost interest in the movie, which is a shame because I think the second act was surprisingly tolerable for a movie I thought I would hate everything about going in. Now it's a movie I hate the first and third act of because they do nothing but completely rub in my face everything I hated about the movie before I even saw a moving frame of it. So what happens in this finale? Well, the Mercs meet up with the family and teenage girl confronts Big Pharma about trying to kill her. He acts very weird in that he's trying to do basically three things at once here, in holding everyone up with a gun, trying to gaslight teenage girl, and trying to say, hey, why don't we all forget about this thing that I did, that I'm saying I didn't do, get our paychecks, and go home. All of these three things seem to be trying to accomplish different goals. Then out of nowhere the dragons attack and painfully attempt to recreate the tension and imagery from the first movie's kitchen scene, and they fail miserably at it. Big Pharma tries to shoot one of the dragons, but Zora takes the gun so she can do it herself because he sucks at it, and then he takes a car to make a getaway, leaving everyone to their demise as he tries to get to a nearby boat. What about the helicopter? Well, the Gigasloposaurus fucking eats it. It somehow managed to grab the helicopter out of the sky, or maybe off of the helipad, we don't see this happen, and fits the entire helicopter into its mouth, crushing it in its jaws before tossing it away, killing everyone inside in a fiery explosion. Luckily, Duncan's found a nearby speedboat, which of course has working gas after 17 years. So now it's a race to get to the boat before Big Pharma, but that's less of a concern as Big Pharma gets eaten by the Gigasloposaurus. Now we just have to escape this stupid thing. Why don't you try slapping it on its fucking forehead? They're having some trouble getting the boat into the water, and flashing lights are attracting the Gigasloposaurus, so Duncan grabs a flare and draws it away so everyone else can get into the boat and escape, sacrificing himself in the process as the Gigasloposaurus corners him as he's chest deep in water inside of a swamp. 2 minutes later he's fine, and the Gigasloposaurus is nowhere to be seen. We don't even know how he escaped it. We don't even see it again. But whatever, they pick him up in the boat, and everyone lives happily ever after with the samples they collected as dolphins crest the water beside them. Why dolphins? Like, the little girl asked if there were dolphins in the water earlier in the movie before the Mosasaurus attack. Is that all the through line we need? Is that a callback? That's what we're choosing to call back? The original movie ended with Grant looking out at a flock of pelicans because of the whole dinosaur-bird connection. There was a comfort in knowing that even though he was leaving the non-avian dinosaurs behind, they were still around us. I know it's a hell of a nitpick, but hey, I'll nitpick fucking Dominion ending off on a shot of that ugly-ass Sinoceratops design. But at least that was an actual dinosaur. Imagine if this doesn't get a sequel and the last excuse for a dinosaur that we see in this franchise is this melon-headed fuck. Oh, melons, maybe that's why we ended on dolphins. Okay, I get it now. So yeah, I wasn't a fan of the movie. It was about what I expected. I figured some sequences would be decent, and they were. And I figured the stuff that would piss me off would be bad, and it was. There's room for a much more thorough dissection, but I'm honestly not sure if I even feel that strongly about the movie to be the one to go through with that. I plan on making a large-scale dissection of the original Jurassic World trilogy because I have a lot to say on those movies, including things that I don't really hear other people talk about. But with this one, I think everything just kind of cancels itself out and makes me feel nothing towards the movie. Was the Mosasaurus sequence pretty cool? Yeah, for sure. Was the second act tolerable? Mostly, yeah. Was it worth sitting through the first and third act, which were both pretty awful? No, not really. This is a script I had to write very quickly because I was concerned the movie would fall out of my head after I watched it. And I don't feel strongly enough about the movie to watch it again right away for the sake of a review. I'll rewatch the Netflix Avatar episodes and even the Shyamalan movie for that sake, but this movie didn't light the fires of hatred within me. In that sense, it's probably the most middle of the road of the Jurassic films, which tells you what kind of curve we're grading on here when that also statistically makes it one of the better ones. Probably underneath the Lost World in overall ranking because I have a similar sense of apathy and annoyance towards both films, but at least the Lost World has great animations and oh yeah, actual dinosaurs in a creative finale. But maybe David Koepp was too traumatized by that finale to want to include dinosaurs on the mainland anymore. I guess I can understand that.